You're looking at the chambers of the Illinois State House of Representatives in Springfield, Illinois. And yes, this is at issue. Thank you for joining us on the program. I'm H. Wayne Wilson, and we're here at the state capitol to talk about response to the governor's speech that he gave at this point in time yesterday, Wednesday afternoon. And to do that, we have with us a representative, a senator, and the president and CEO of the Illinois State Chamber of Commerce. First, let me introduce to you Don Moffitt. Don is a Republican representative from Gilson. Some of you will know that as the Galesburg area. Don, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, H. Nice to be with you.
And seated next to him is 13 years as president and CEO of the Illinois State Chamber of Commerce, Doug Whitley. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me to be on the show.
And we will add that Senator Dave Kaler will join us in just a couple of moments as we kind of split the program in half because of the constraints of the space here at the Chamber of the Illinois House. Let me start with you, Representative. An initial response to the governor's budget address.
Well, I think the governor indicated it will be a difficult budget year with consequences, obviously, depending on which direction we go. And I would agree with that. It's going to be probably the most difficult since I've been in the legislature. The governor did call for a 5-year spending plan this time instead of just the short, 1-year spending plan. And I think that's the right thing to do. We need more long-range planning in Illinois. He called for several things. He called for, like to look at a capital bill, and I think we need to do a capital bill. We had a lot of good things come out of the last one. And I want to point out that a capital bill would have its own revenue stream. It would not be a part of the general fund, and it's the general fund that has some difficulties. So even though we're talking about maybe, the capital bill, that doesn't impact the general fund. Plus, it addresses some very serious infrastructure needs and creates jobs, and we need to take a look at that. The governor did say we need to look at a spending cap in the House in a bipartisan manner, set a spending cap of how much money we realistically think we're going to have to spend. And if we can stay within that limit, we can really address some budget issues. The 3 steps to solving our budget problem are: 1, stop digging the hole deeper, and you do that with a spending cap that you will not dig it any deeper. Secondly, make installment payments on the deficit. And third, improve that business climate so that we do create some private sector jobs that, when you do that, then you increase in revenue from state income tax and state sales tax by people working and having jobs and buying things. The governor also called for doubling the earned income tax credit. I think we need to take a look at that. He also called for some property tax relief, which we need to do. In Illinois, we are so heavily reliant on the property tax to fund education, much more so than any other state. Governor Edgar tried to address that with a proposal he had to give property tax relief in exchange for raising the income tax.
15 years ago.
Right. And it passed the House and was never called for a vote in the Senate. I did vote for that bill, by the way. Thought it was the right plan at that time. Another issue the governor mentioned, and this will be a very difficult one, the temporary state income tax increase. He's calling on to make that permanent. We've got to look at how will that impact business? How will that impact jobs, private sector jobs in Illinois?
With that in mind, let me turn to the president and CEO of the Illinois State Chamber because we're talking that issue. What's your take on that?
Well, my reaction was quite a bit different than Representative Moffitt's. I thought it was a political speech. It was not a budget speech. He hit upon themes that voters would care about. He talked about education, which I seem to think is the first really emphasis on education spending in quite a while because the General Assembly's been cutting education spending. He talked about property tax relief, another good theme for the voting public. So I didn't think he was talking to the General Assembly in his budget message. I thought he was talking to the public at home about an election campaign that he was about to launch. The third point that he made is he made it very emphatic that he would not sign any legislation that would expand taxation to include pensions. So all of those were themes that appealed to, I think, more to the public than the General Assembly looking for a budget message.
No, I'm sorry, but let me talk about specifics with regard to the taxes. Now, we know that, I believe it's the Constitution, correct me if I'm wrong here, Representative, but the Constitution says that you have to propose a budget that lives within the income guidelines that are currently in place. We know that as currently set up, the personal income tax will drop back to 3.75%. halfway through the fiscal year starting July 1. So he hasn't, he never said anything, he never used the word 5%, never said that. How's he going to propose a budget when he's violating the Constitution like that?
Well, as a legislature, we cannot count on that income. We need to assume that it's going to go back to to the 3.75 and back to what the legislation called for when it was called a temporary tax. We cannot budget that in. As I mentioned, the proposed pension savings, until the courts rule and say that that's constitutional, we cannot project any savings in terms of pension reform. So no, we can't. I see it as violating the Constitution if we put those things in there when they are not. They're just possibilities.
A couple observations. Number one, although the Illinois Constitution calls for a balanced budget, I am hard pressed to say that we've had a balanced budget in Illinois for well over a decade. For a whole variety of reasons, and this budget is not likely to be any more balanced than the ones in the past. I think most would say a balanced budget is dollars in, dollars spent. Oh, and by the way, a little bit of surplus left in the checking account when it's done, and we haven't been there for a long time. The income tax is scheduled to roll off. The legislature will make the determination whether it rolls off or at what rate it may roll back to. Maybe it doesn't go all the way. The governor, what the governor did today was he staked out his position that it should stay in place, but it's not his choice. It's the General Assembly's choice. So we'll see how that plays out over the next few weeks.
Knowing that the governor doesn't always see eye to eye with the Democrats in the House or Senate, what is your take? Have you talked to enough of your fellow representatives and senators to determine whether or not you think the income tax will stay at 5%?
I don't think there are votes to do that. I don't anticipate any Republicans' votes in the House to make it permanent, and I think there would be quite a few Democrats that would not vote to make it permanent. So I don't think there are the votes to do it.
Which then leads back to his original point, which is it's going to be a very difficult budget year if you can't count on that revenue. And I also think it's going to be hard pressed to keep that tax at 5%.
And corporately, we're talking a higher tax rate. Where's the chamber stand on that?
Well, the Illinois corporate income tax rate is the second or third highest in the country right now at 9.5%. That's excessive, and I think that politically, legislators ought to be thinking about the economics and the competitiveness between the states. So my biggest measure would be Indiana. I don't think Illinois' corporate income tax rate should ever be higher than Indiana's. And right now, I think Indiana's about 6.5. So I would argue that the corporate income tax rate should be cut back at least to that level and recognize the competitive nature of state tax structures.
Representative, any chance of that happening?
Well, the Speaker has mentioned the possibility of doing something like that, so we might get a chance to vote on that. And I think we do. We're not an island here by ourselves. We have to look at what our states in the region are doing, and one of the things we could do to make us more attractive would be lower that corporate income tax. So we should look at it. I hope we can. The Speaker has mentioned the possibility.
There are at least two proposals out there, one from the Speaker talking about a 3% tax on earnings more than $1 million. Your take on that?
I don't think that has much of a chance. I don't think there would be any, right now I don't believe there would be any Republican votes in favor of that. Again, those people, that group of citizens are very mobile, and you raise the taxes and they may suddenly have a residence somewhere else. Some of them have more than one residence, and so that I think it's a little bit it's not as accurate a projection of how much money that would generate, because I think some of it would be leaving the area.
Then let me jump to Don Harmon's proposal, and that's the progressive tax. There would be 3 tiers in that particular income tax. A chance of that?
I think it's very slim. Again, I don't think there's any Republican support for a progressive tax.
And with regard to the chamber?
Well, I think the fact that the Speaker proposed a new variation of a progressive tax for just imposing a higher rate on millionaires, I interpreted that as an indication that Plan A, the progressive tax proposal, was dead, and Plan B would be this proposed tax only on the high income. Well, I take a little bit exception with Representative Moffitt. The Republicans are not in charge. The Democrats have enough votes in both chambers to pass that measure if they wish. It's a constitutional amendment proposal. That means that they actually don't raise the tax. They only put it to the voters to make a decision about whether or not to raise the tax. So politically, it's a good way to get out of the fundamental question of imposing the extra high tax. There's only one state in the country that has a tax bracket that's for a millionaire or more, and that's New York. One of the other issues that comes into play, which you haven't heard people talk about yet, is it would be a constitutional amendment, 3% rate. It's not clear what the tax base will be, whether it's net or gross or with or without exemptions, so that's in question. The other one is it 3% on 5, which would make it 8, which would make us one of the higher tax states in the country, or is it 3% on 3.5 with the roll, or 3.75 with the rollback? So those things remain to be determined. The constitutional amendment must be adopted by May the 4th or 6th. The legislature doesn't go home until the end of May, and if they don't make that determination, they actually have after the November election to make that determination. So we're doing this with a little vacuum about where things will shake out.
60% of both the House and the Senate must approve that before it goes to the voters? It's 3/5, I believe,
Yes.
for a constitutional amendment to
Right.
go to the voters.
Right.
So you don't
which is
see-
a bare minimum in terms of what the Democrat makeup of the House. So every Democrat would have to vote for it, and I think that's unlikely.
In the final 30 seconds with you, Representative, anything else that struck you about this speech? I think most people here, he said at the start, I'm going to talk specifics. He didn't talk specifics.
Well, I think in terms of one area in education that was not mentioned, sometimes when we talk funding education and if there are cutbacks, one area that's been hit exceptionally hard is on transportation funding. And that's part of education when you get out into the rural area. Well, it's part of everywhere, but especially when you get into rural areas. So, education has taken some hits, might take some more. I think we also need to get that out here as part of the discussion that probably downstate schools have been hit the hardest.
As a matter of fact, the highway account in the Highway Trust Fund, if nothing has changed and you don't transfer some money like you did this past year, will go into a deficit spending arena by July 1st, I believe. So, Representative Don Moffett, I want to thank you very much for joining us on At Issue. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with Doug Whitley and also Senator Dave Kaler in just a moment. We're joined now by Senator Dave Kaler of Peoria. Dave, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, H.
The Senator's also joined by Doug Whitley, the President and CEO of the Illinois State Chamber of Commerce, who will continue the conversation. But first, Senator, what's your overall take on the governor's budget address?
Well, I like what he said about education. That's what I was specifically looking for, because I've been meeting with school superintendents, not only in my district, but really throughout central Illinois, and they're scared about what they have to do in terms of trying to project a budget for next year. And we're funding them right now at 89% of what we should be paying them. They were fearful that it might go down to 65%. If that happens, then we've got more teacher layoffs, we've got more programs that are eliminated. I mean, there's a lot of lip service given in Springfield to education. We need to put our money where our mouth is, and I think the governor's serious about doing that.
He spent a lot of time on education. He talked about adding $1.5 billion to birth through 5.
Yes.
He talked about over a period of 5 years adding $6 billion to elementary and high school
Right.
education. And he also talked about MAP scholarships,
MAP
higher ed. Money for this?
Well, he also talked about we need to continue where we are right now, which is at 5% in the income tax rate. I mean, I tell you what, we made a big mistake 4 years ago. We didn't make it permanent right off the bat. If I have to take a hard vote, let me do it once. Because now we created this crisis. Now schools are trying to figure out how do they budget for this year, and we have half a year that we have stability. That's not fair to them. So I think that I'm fully prepared to make this permanent. I think that if we want to talk about making Illinois an attractive place to do business, we've got to have a well-educated, well-qualified workforce that's ready to go to work when they graduate from community college or college.
Your response to that?
Well, I want to agree with the senator. I was very pleased that the governor spent as much time as he did on education today. I personally have changed my rhetoric about 6 months ago. I also started talking about the fact that we've been shortchanging education. There are a couple of fundamental roles that government must perform, and one of them is education and make sure there's a quality educated workforce. And another one that's fundamental is infrastructure, continued infrastructure investment, and the third one is public safety. And so when he spent as much time as he did, I thought that was an interesting departure from what we've been hearing from the governor's office over the last few years.
You mentioned infrastructure. Let me turn to the senator. Illinois Jobs Now, 5 years ago, $31 billion, somewhere in that range. The chances of a new jobs bill, capital program?
As soon as he mentioned that there was a committee, a bipartisan committee that was going to be looking at infrastructure, like a new capital bill, I texted the governor's chief of staff and I said, I want to be on that. And this is one of the things that Doug has been a leader in Illinois, is that we need to put more money into infrastructure. Our 5-year, what we did 4 years ago, is almost at the end of its course. And we know that number one, it produces jobs. Number two, we've got to get goods and services to market, and we don't want to have bad roads and dangerous bridges to do that. Infrastructure is the key to any economy, and whether it's rail, whether it's our rivers in terms of barge traffic, highways, those are all important.
When I've talked to the mayors around Central Illinois, whether it be Jim Artis, John Pritchard, Chris Coos, Terry Renner, they all have the same theme, almost to the word. You keep taking money away from local government.
Right.
Let me ask both of you, starting with the senator. What was your response to the governor saying, and it was a quote, to protect state funding to local government?
I think I applauded probably at that level. I absolutely agree with that, because we've been unfair to our local communities. When we passed the temporary increase 4 years ago, we didn't allow that increase to also be recognized by our local governments. We should do that. That's an issue of fairness.
It'll come up in the question of extending the tax.
Yes, it will.
At that time, the state government wanted the dollars, and so they claimed the dollars. But historically, 10% of all the income tax receipts in the state have flown back to municipalities, and so municipalities felt like they were shortchanged the last time around. I would remind you that transportation programs also flow back to municipalities. In fact, we have 147,000 miles of roads in Illinois. We have 9,000 bridges that are maintained by the state alone. I can't tell you what the...
Right.
But municipalities, townships, counties, and road districts are all dependent upon pass-through money flowing back to them from the state. So when the state road fund, which will, in this case, will expire July 1st, just a few weeks from now, we'll start on a downhill trend on funding for infrastructure, and that's why we have to come back. I, on the other hand, was a little bit concerned about the governor calling for a commission. Governor Quinn likes commissions, but in reality, commissions are a good way to kick the issue down the road, the proverbial can down the road, until after the election. So I interpreted that to suggest that we're not going to deal
that's a good point.
we're not going to deal with transportation and other infrastructure needs until I'm reelected and
I didn't think about it that way, but
firmly in office.
yeah, we need an infrastructure bill now,
Yeah.
and I would agree with that. But if there's going to be a commission, I want to be on it.
Yeah.
Earlier, you indicated that you thought this was a kind of a populist speech, but there's one thing that struck me. I thought there was a bit of politics in here, especially at the end, because the governor said tax less and spend less is not a way to run a government. And I take that as being...
I didn't hear that exact quote, but...
those aren't exact words. He said, to tax less and spend less is not telling the truth.
Yeah.
Your take?
Well, it's election year. I mean, first of all, let's recognize that. But I think the governor did a very good job in laying the thing out just as exactly what he wanted to do. He's making no bones about the continuation of the tax base that's in place right now. That's going to be an issue the legislature has to decide. I'm fully prepared to vote for that. I think that he laid his other priorities out, starting with education and starting with property tax relief to property tax homeowners especially. Those are two things I agree with. And if it's going to be an election year, let's lay it all out and put your best foot forward.
Another observation about the remarks, he referenced Governor Jim Edgar, and he referenced it within the context of state funding versus local funding for education. But I took it one step further in that Jim Edgar ran to be elected governor by saying, I want to maintain the temporary income tax.
Yeah.
And it worked for Jim Edgar. And I'm wondering if Pat Quinn isn't thinking, I want that to work for me as well. So he staked out his position. Ultimately, he can't make that decision. The General Assembly makes that decision. But he staked out his position saying, I want more revenue to spend for government. I think over the last few weeks, he's really been caught on the horns of a dilemma. The populist thing to do is to say less taxation. But when you're in the governor's office and you're responsible for the budget and you know what all the pressures are that are being thrown your way and you know what you've already done to try to restrain spending, question is, do I want to continue down that path? He clearly said he does not want to continue down that path. Meanwhile, the Republicans will say, you know, you had $30 billion worth of new revenue over the last 3 years, and where did it go? So we're going to have a tough budget cycle back and forth about what is the appropriate level of spending going forward.
Remember one thing that's very important, though, is that if you don't put your money where your priority is in education, then the public shouldn't think that, well, that just goes away. It shows up when you look at your arrests and your police reports and how many people you have to incarcerate. If we don't, you know, it's like the oil frame filter guy. If we don't pay for it now, we pay for it later. It's just in different ways. And so I think we have to, again, address the quality of our education. And I really applaud him in saying, you know, public schools, you know, really is our responsibility, and we have to make them excellent.
If I could, I think there's another piece to this, and that is how you currently spend the dollars. State Senator Menard has been running a commission.
Yes.
Are you on that commission?
No, I'm not, but I'm aware of it.
Within the Senate to talk about how are all the education dollars that we already have, how are they allocated? And I think that ought to be part of the discussion here. We have not fundamentally revisited education funding for over 20 years. It's still a patchwork Band-Aid kind of approach with lots of special interest carve-outs. If you really want to go back to the bottom line to make sure you're getting the best bang for the buck and you're spending the dollar properly, I think you should go back to a zero-based budgeting on that education budget and say, yes, plus the new money the governor wants. Are we going to be able to do what we want? Because here's the issue. Legislators and candidates for public office and governors say, I'm an education candidate. But in reality, we've not been an education state now for many years. We've been a healthcare state. Healthcare gets more spending than education does. And so this begins, as you say, where are your real priorities? Are your priorities for education? Then put the dollars there. The governor has suggested that it's there. Now we'll see whether or not it comes through.
Well, and I want to support what you're saying. Andy Menard and Dave Luchtefeld, a Republican senator, have co-chaired this meeting. This is a bipartisan committee that the Senate has set up to look at revamping the whole school formula as it, you know, changing it from what it exists right now. And Senator Menard makes an excellent point. I've had him come in and talk to some of our superintendents. He said, you know, there's two issues. One is about the amount of money we have to spend, but the first issue that we have to solve is how do we spend it? And we have to have a fair, equitable system that makes sense. And I think they're getting there. And I think that this is a good example. I mean, just like transportation is usually a good bipartisan effort, this is going to be a bipartisan effort.
By my count, education was mentioned much more often than anything else in this speech. But second probably was property tax relief.
Right.
He's saying $500 or suggesting $500 a year for the future. Do you see that happening, and in conjunction with what?
Well, right now we get a 5% credit on our income taxes for what we pay in property taxes. Okay, and that's so if you pay more in property taxes, you get a bigger credit. That would go away. This would be a flat $500 per property. You know, when a person pays their property taxes. I think the average right now I've heard is about $250 is what we give out in terms of that credit. So some would get more and some would get less, but it's a way of making it almost a progressive way of giving property tax relief.
And I cut my eye teeth on state and local finances. I was revenue director of the state of Illinois at one time, and I'll give the governor credit for this. We are overtaxed in our property taxes, and property taxes hurt the voters more so than anything else.
Right.
But I'm a huge skeptic of the idea that everybody ought to get a check from government, because it impresses me of just trying to buy off the public. Oh, here's my check from the government. I don't think we want to get into that mode. I'd much rather have some kind of guaranteed relief on the property tax bill that you actually see on your property tax bill, not some income redistribution aspect, but your property taxes go down. And I would say the best way to get them to go down is to make sure the state's giving adequate money for education funding
that's
so
a big
can
issue,
hold it down.
right.
So I'm very skeptical about that component.
Well, but let me-
15
He's out of
seconds.
time.
the main thing, though, is that he did highlight the issue of property tax relief. Now, how it comes out in the legislature could be a whole different issue.
That's up to
But-
you
But it's
in
up
the
to us.
legislature.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I like the idea of what he
And
put
thank you
forward.
to Doug Whitley,
Thank you.
who's the president and CEO of the Illinois State Chamber of Commerce, to Dave Kaler, representing Peoria as a Democratic senator, and earlier in the show we had Don Moffett, who is a Republican representative from the Galesburg area. We thank you for joining us on At Issue. Next week, join us for a discussion about agriculture with the new president of the Illinois Farm Bureau. We'll see you in a week.